Salam, everybody. Welcome to the Samawat Network. This is our latest discussion that we have. Thank you all for joining us tonight. I know we started a little bit late, but we have a lot of different time zones that we were trying to accommodate to for tonight. So thank you to everyone who is able to join us and to be on this call right now. And just a reminder for all of you to please make sure that you are on the Facebook page, commenting, asking questions. We've had a lot of really good comments, questions that have come up in the past few days, and we encourage you all to keep that discussion going. Please post as we go along. If you have something that you hear that you want to comment directly to, feel free to do so. We encourage all of you to make sure that this is an opportunity for all of us to engage as a community. So we'll go ahead and just briefly talk about what our discussion is on tonight. So tonight, the title was called Living Outside the War. So for many of us, including those of us that are in this call, we did not grow up in Afghanistan, and the Samawat Network is meant to be a place for people from the Afghan diaspora to discuss issues that are pertinent to them. And so we thought it was really important to make sure that we talk about the conflict that's happening in Afghanistan, the current war that has been occurring for the past 14 years and beyond. So even the words that we use, like war, conflict, those kinds of things are hopefully things we can discuss and how we frame just even describing this conflict. So we'll go ahead and get started with just some intros from everybody and let you introduce you all to the panelists. So we'll start on my far left, which is Afifa first. So if you want to just go ahead and a brief introduction to yourself.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. My name is Afifa. I'm from Southern California. I'm a community college counselor, and I'm also pursuing an LPCC license, which is for clinical counseling. I think that's about it. Happy to be here.
And Ali John.
Salam everyone, I am Ali. I'm a writer and historian of the Middle East and Islam, and I'm a PhD student at the University of California in Irvine.
And Bilal.
Salam everyone, my name is Bilal Asghariar. I'm a master's student here in Washington, D.C. I lived and worked in Afghanistan, so I saw kind of firsthand some of the issues for a little bit that we're going to be talking about today.
And Habib John.
Hi everyone, I am a student at University of Denver. I'm doing a master's degree in international relations, and my focus is Middle East and Islam, and human rights in Middle East. I'm happy to be here.
And Lema John. You gotta unmute yourself, Lema.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you're good.
Okay. I'm a former community advocate from Fremont, California. I'm now a civil rights lobbyist. That's it.
And Rajan?
Salam, my name is Noura. I'm working on my PhD in political science at Duke University.
And Reza?
Salam everybody, my name is Reza. I work as a teacher in Southern California, and I'm also a former community organizer.
And Soraya John?
Hi, I'm Soraya. I'm studying international development studies in Toronto. I was involved with the anti-war movement, and specifically the Afghan-led anti-war movement. Afghans for Peace, and now Afghans United for Justice, and I'm happy to be here and talking with you all.
And my name is Omar Aziz, live from the Bay Area, California, and I currently work at UC Santa Cruz with students that live on campus here, and happy to be a part of this discussion and to talk with all of you and get the chance to hear your thoughts and hear from the folks that are online. So we'll go ahead and just get started with the first question, and I wanted to start with an opportunity for people to share a little bit some of their how this war has affected them personally. So, the U.S.-led, occupation in Afghanistan started, it's been going on for about 14 years now. So, for those of us coming from different perspectives and different backgrounds, how has that impacted you personally? So just give everyone an opportunity to, not necessarily everybody, but give us an opportunity to share our stories and how this conflict has impacted us. Habib John, we'll start with you.
So I grew up in Afghanistan. My family was one of the few families who left behind and never left the country. We didn't even make it to Pakistan or Iran, let alone Western countries. So I remember the last few years of the socialist government, and then the civil war, and then after that the Taliban, and then the American invasion of Afghanistan. I was very young when the Americans started bombing Afghanistan, and I was one of the millions of Afghans who were happy that the Americans were. Maybe that was because we didn't know. I didn't know much about what was going to happen next, or why the Americans were bombing. Maybe I was influenced by there's too much propaganda that the Americans were projecting from the United States and the Afghans who were living in Europe and the United States. Anyways, I was one of the millions of Afghans who were very hopeful that now that the United States is getting rid of the Taliban, they will provide an atmosphere where we can bring all the criminals who destroyed the country to justice. But that didn't happen. The Americans just replaced one group of human rights violators and criminals with another group of human rights violators, and that all those dreams and hopes that we had, it was shattered. And it was in the second year of invasion when I lost some members of my tribes, my relatives, and that completely changed my perspective and my thinking about this whole U.S. invasion and occupation of Afghanistan. And slowly, as I started reading and working as a journalist, I changed like 180% degrees about the U.S. invasion and occupation of Afghanistan.
And Lema, go ahead, and you wanted to say something?
Yeah, my perspective is probably very different because I was born in California, and growing up here, there's almost a privilege pre-war that we were just living a very comfortable life. So once 2011 it happened, it was a change of narrative on how I saw myself as an individual, how other people perceived me, and how I had to navigate myself within our society post-war. I think it made me realize how other I was and how quickly that happened. And so the conflict started when you have people who are like, where are you from? And you're like, Afghanistan. And people they don't know what to think. I've got lots of negative reactions. And they're like, but you don't look like the bad guy. You don't look like one of those people. So constantly having to defend ourselves was part of the change of my identity. Second, the conflict is from the very beginning. We had questions of, why are you going to Afghanistan? You don't even know where Osama bin Laden is, right? So the question is, the intent was questionable. Second was worrying about the human lives that are affected, because before you knew they had gone through the Soviet invasion, then the aftermath, and the Civil War, and then the Taliban. So part of you was kind of happy that they were going in to try to eradicate, that really strong dictatorship. But the other part was you also didn't want the drone killings and civilians that were affected. And so it was a constant struggle moving forward. When you ask family members, they were all happy that the U.S. I know in my circle, they were all happy that the U.S. invasion occurred, because they knew how people were not happy under the Taliban rule. Again, motives very skewed. Are they going to liberate women? Is that really justification? I mean, what are intentions we're constantly called upon? So I think these are all kind of the ideas that affected me during that time and continues to.
And Alijan?
Yeah, Lemedron really took the words out of my mouth, and I agree. The war was a turning point in my experience as an Afghan-American here in this country. Before the war, you encountered the sense of being exotic or different, often in innocuous questions. Do your people celebrate Thanksgiving? Was the question you would get growing up. What do your people do for Christmas? What's that box you guys pray to out in the desert? So it was always ignorant, it was always exotic, but after the war, the questions became more sharp. It turned into a litmus test about patriotism and about loyalty. The first question wasn't, what do your people believe or what do your people celebrate? It was, what do you think about the war? Don't you think it's a good thing we're over there? Why are your people fighting? And being critical of the war or having any type of interrogation of the war meant that you were not patriotic enough. So you were distinctly aware that your views were not American enough, even if you were born and raised in this country. So the war was a turning point for me in terms of identity and where I stand in the country, as well as my own stances against the war.
Well,
I think it's interesting that we've all been talking about the war as in starting in 2001, when in reality, as Afghans, our history of violence and war starts in 1979, right? And as Afghans, we have all experienced this trauma of war, whether or not we were born in or lived in Afghanistan. We are the children of immigrants who left Afghanistan because of war. I mean, since the Soviet invasion, I think a third of Afghanistan left, and that goes to that first decade after the Soviet invasion. So if you can imagine what happens to a country when a third of its population leaves and 2/3 are left behind, right? That's traumatic for both sides. The people that leave have to give up their entire life, and the people who stay behind have to make do with what's left and the remaining internal violence. We are all children of this conflict that has been going on for a long time. So I think even for us Afghan-Americans who have been lucky and privileged enough to never see a bombing in our lives, we still have inherited that PTSD and that trauma.
and Soraya Jan, I think you were going to share something, and then Nura Jan afterwards.
Yeah, I would completely agree that we've all been affected by the war, from the Soviet war to, Taliban era, civil war, and but specifically, speaking about the U.S.-led invasion in 2001, I still remembered as a 15-year-old kid listening to Bush announce it, and I felt three things mainly. The first was a sense of connection to my roots, a sense of kinship to my community, and wanting to protect it, and feeling very loyal to my Afghan roots. The second thing I felt was an overwhelming sense of anger and outrage that this Western superpower was going to invade and bomb my country. I knew innocent civilians were going to die. It was inevitable. And the third, I would say, was a deep sadness and powerlessness to do anything to stop it.
Yeah, I guess to echo off of what folks were saying, I feel like I had this in-between experience. I was born in Kuwait. My family took political asylum there, and 2 weeks before the Gulf War began in Kuwait, we came for a vacation for the first time to the United States. So we narrowly escaped a second war, but we left half of my family in Kuwait. And so this emotional trauma that Bill John was talking about the war, like most of us were born into it, and I think most of us have had family that has been kidnapped, casualties. It's such a norm in our communities, but we've just internalized it and not really processed it. So even just talking about the war, it's not even political, it's very emotional, right? And I think it takes a lot of vulnerability and courage, even for us that are younger, that have seen less than maybe our parents, or maybe that Habib John has seen living through it. It is a very emotional thing to talk about because we have families that live there, that continue to live there. So looking at it and intellectualizing it is a difficult process because of the attachments we have, even if it is to varying degrees, right? And so even when it became sort of the salient thing to talk about, when the U.S. invaded, it's such a personal thing that suddenly people are asking, what's your opinion? And it's like, this goes deep for us, right? And we can't just give you a 30-second soundbite like you want us to. So I think that's important to mention.
I think Omar's stuck, so maybe I'll go ahead and kind of talk a little bit about my experience in terms of, I was in 6th grade when 9/11 happened, and so for me, kind of this newer wave of the war has really taken the span of most of my, life, at least growing up. And I think within that, to kind of echo what Bilal Jung said, is, that generational trauma that a lot of this, has affected us in maybe ways that we don't even recognize, and taken shape in our communities in ways that we may not recognize immediately. But that's definitely a part of it. I think for me, it was hard to understand as a child or to comprehend. And adding on to that, just kind of the fact that I grew up in a predominantly middle upper class white neighborhood, and so there was a lot of pressure and shift in terms of having my answer be the answer, and kind of being the only one, to kind of provide that perspective or framework for people. And I think for me, growing up, that's been a really heavy experience to carry. And I think part of it too, I would say that, within that there was a lot of shame, that there was a lot of confusion in terms of kind of, how do I develop that identity, and what does this mean for me, and do I need to apologize to somebody for something? And, but even though I didn't necessarily feel that way, I think there was some pressure that I should feel that way. I'm not sure exactly where those messages came from, but that they were definitely present for me for the majority of my life. And I think that it was at a point where I did learn really beautiful and positive things about my culture and history and heritage, that those kind of identity issues or things started to shift for me. And I think that connecting within the community has been a big part of that as well.
All right, cool. I think I'm back now. Sorry for the technical difficulties, if anyone, if I wasn't showing up for a little bit. But I did want to move on to another question that I think is related to what some of the people were talking about. So I think a lot of us share that we have very different experiences. Well, we had different experiences in how it affected us. And then I'd like to take a couple minutes to just talk about how the concept of privilege within the Afghan community and how that has shaped what that experience might have been like. So, within the Afghan community, whether it's class, ethnicity, religion, whatever it may be, how has that played a role in your understanding of the war, or in your in just how you've experienced it? So I was hoping we'd take a couple minutes to answer that question from folks. So Lema, go ahead and you can start us off.
So I'm not sure I fully understand your question. It seems like it's really broad. I just know personally that in terms of like privilege, I understood my privilege of being from a family that was able to flee in the very beginning of the Soviet invasion. I understood looking back that I had a privilege of comfort, and that was why I was so involved in the Afghan-American community, because I didn't know how to be involved overseas. And so there's almost like a humbleness that you have a duty to want to help your community move up in any way you can. So I felt like my privilege was what pushed me to want to help with fundraisers or school supply events or for clothing drives or anything like that to give back to Afghanistan. And it wasn't until later I realized that these small things, like there's more that you can do. But that's with how I understood your question, how I can see that particular idea of privilege and class plays a role.
I think you understood it pretty well, Lema. We'll go to Soraya, John.
Yeah, I think it plays a huge role. Speaking for myself, when I would do either panel events or speaking events at different anti-war functions, I was very aware of my privilege, and I did not ever feel comfortable speaking as a representative for the Afghan community, certainly not for the Afghans who were living on the front lines. So we had Afghans we Skype with and work with in Kabul, Afghanistan. You guys might have heard of them, the Afghan peace volunteers, who were a pacifist group of Afghan youth in Kabul and Bamiyan working there. And so I would always reach out to them, be like, well, what do you have to say? What can I share at these events? I'm speaking mostly to a Western audience. I want to put your voice on a platform. I want your voice to be heard here because I obviously can't speak for you. So that's something I was always very aware of. One other Afghan I knew who I had worked with, who grew up in the U.S., he chastised the Afghan peace volunteers in Kabul because they asked the United Nations to call for a ceasefire in the West.